One of the most mystical and enduring elements of the Arthurian legend is Avalon. Known as the Isle of Apples, it is described as a paradise shrouded in mystery, often depicted as a place of healing, magic, and eternal youth. Its association with King Arthur has made it a focal point of interest for hundreds of years. However, what is authentic folklore, passed down orally from the times before written history, and what are later inventions of pure fiction? In the old Arthurian legends, as we all know, King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table defended the ancient Britons from out of their stronghold, the Castle Camelot. His loyal men included the brave Sir Lancelot, the loyal Sir Bedivere, and the pure Sir Galahad. There were also the famous magical characters, the wizard Merlin, and the enchantress Morgan Le Fay. In the stories, Arthur attained his legendary sword, thought to possess magical qualities, Excalibur, from the famous Lady of the Lake, an enchantress also called Vivian or Nimue. Camelot, the Lady of the Lake. These are some famous sites of Arthurian legend. The most famous of all, probably, is Avalon. In the later tales, this is a magical island ruled over by 9 powerful magic using enchantresses. These were supposed to be 9 sisters, of which Morgan Le Fay was their most powerful leader, and the ruler of the island of Avalon. This was an enchanted place, where eternal youth, happiness, magic, and healing were the norm. In the stories, Arthur's sword, Excalibur, was apparently forged there, and he was led to Avalon by enchantress guides upon being wounded in his final battle. According to the legend, he was supernaturally healed in Avalon and made undying and ageless by magic. He is apparently still there. People say that he'll return to defend his native land again someday. That's the basic story. But how much of it is true? Well, recent evidence of heavy activity in Cadbury Castle, in Somerset, England, during the period when the Round Table was supposedly in force seems to make it a candidate for Camelot. The lake where the Lady of the Lake distributed swords is often thought to be Dozmerry Pool, in Cornwall, due to the fact the legends seem to indicate that Sir Bedivere threw Excalibur into this particular lake after Arthur left for Avalon. Legend holds that the Lady, Vivian, stuck her hand up out of the lake and caught it. And lastly, the city of Glastonbury, also in Somerset, England, has long held that it is the site of the original island of Avalon. Glastonbury is just your average town in England nowadays, but geological record does seem to support the fact that it was likely flooded with marshlands in the early Middle and Dark Ages, and so could be said to have been some sort of an island once. However, before we make up our minds about where Camelot is and where Avalon is, it's important to establish one thing first. Where's this legend from? When was Arthur first talked about, and, consequently, where was he actually from? Arthurian legends were comic books and Hollywood tales of the Middle Ages. It's impossible to overstate how popular these tales were in medieval England. And the book that started it all, and first made Arthurian legends popular in England, was Geoffrey of Monmouth. In his work, Historia Regum Britanniae, the history of the kings of Britain, written around 1136. However, what you almost never seem to hear, unless you're really looking for it, is that the actual origins of Arthurian legend are deeply rooted in Welsh folklore. Early Welsh literature contains the unquestioned earliest references to Arthur and his exploits. They all predate Monmouth's work, which is often, very wrongly, cited as the first mention of King Arthur. The earliest Welsh mentions of Arthur include the titles the Mabinogion, Culhwch and Olwen, and the so-called Welsh Triads, and are thought by historians to be based on much older world traditions. That means they were likely talking and singing songs about Arthur in Wales since the Dark Ages. Maybe since the day when Arthur himself was around in Wales. Given these early Welsh sources, it is unlikely that Cadbury Castle in England was the actual stronghold of the historical Arthur, if such a figure existed. In contrast, the idea of a Camelot in Wales is more plausible. The early Welsh poem, Pogger Wyby Porthor, What Man is the Gatekeeper, mentions and describes Arthur's court and his warriors, suggesting that his stronghold could have been located where it was written, in Wales. Similarly, the identification of Glastonbury as Avalon is problematic. In Welsh tradition, Avalon is referred to as Anwen, a mystical otherworld that could only be reached by large ships. This concept is illustrated in the Welsh poem Prydau Anwen, The Spoils of Anwen, where Arthur and his warriors travel to Anwen using large ships. The marshy landscape around Glastonbury during the Dark Ages would have made it inaccessible to such vessels. Instead, Anwen was likely envisioned as a distant, enchanted island, probably out at sea. So, does this actual Welsh history of Arthur being different from what Monmouth and all the later romanticizers of the later time, who seem dead set on making it all English, is actually all false? And so the Arthur tales are actually all fake? Well, actually, no. If you look back at the Welsh Arthur poems, it's actually surprising how much of it is still there. Arthur is there, Morgan Le Fay is still there, called Modron, Merlin is still there, Sir Bedivere is still Arthur's most loyal sidekick, and Excalibur was still forged on Avalon, which, of course, is called Anwen. Camelot does not exist by name, but Arthur's court is described in detail. So, there was a Welsh Camelot of some kind. The story of the Lady of the Lake giving the sword to Arthur isn't mentioned, but given that the Lady of the Lake was considered an enchantress from Avalon, and the old Welsh tales consider Excalibur to be from Avalon, it makes sense, in the old tales too, that an enchantress like the Lady of the Lake would have given it to him. There is even the same fine and exact detail in the old tales, such as Avalon being occupied by 9 enchantresses. It's actually amazing how much of Arthurian legend was mentioned in the original Welsh works actually. Even Lancelot, called Lawinoch, mentioned in the Welsh triads as a brave horseman and knight-errant, and Guinevere, mentioned as Arthur's wife, are there. Far from disproving Arthurian legends, when you do the research and realize the tales are originally Welsh, you not only realize that little of it was made up, but that it actually goes a long way to make the likelihood of Arthur having been real much more likely. Unlike when you think Monmouth just made this up in England one day, without any historical record, when you realize it comes from extremely old Welsh oral tradition, you realize this king could well have existed, unrecorded in the pre-literate Dark Ages of Wales, back in the mists of time. It actually becomes much more likely to be true, with very little except its Englishness, and all the more romantic stuff having been made up. Even the later naming of Avalon as the Isle of Apples ties into the old Celtic fae beliefs of the otherworld in Anwen, given apples were seen by the ancient Celts as possessing a magical quality of immortality and healing, just like Avalon does. So now that we've discovered the truth about Avalon, and where and what it actually was, according to the accurate historical origins, what was the real Avalon like? Having peeled away the fictional stuff, and armed only with the original, unadulterated folklore, let's look at it. The real Avalon, preserved from the old Welsh oral tales, is an island shrouded in mist. As it is out at sea, it is likely to be somewhere off the Welsh coast. It is considered a part of what's called the Otherworld, an ancient Celtic concept similar to the Fae or fairy world in Old English folklore. Called Anwen, it is often referred to as a magical island cloaked in protective mist that can only be crossed with the help of an enchantress or magical guide. On this island are a council of 9 enchantresses. These women wield powerful magic, and use it to create and maintain their beautiful island, which, much like Lothlorien, the elf city in Lord of the Rings, is a place of eternal life, youth, healing, and magic, kept alive by these 9 women. This is remarkably similar to the later Arthur tales, who told the story, not necessarily true, but true to the facts, that Arthur, after his final battle, was led to Avalon by enchantresses through the impenetrable mists, and was healed in this magic place and given eternal life, so he may be ready to return to his native land one day in order to defend it again. The Welsh poem about Arthur going to Avalon was for the purpose of getting a magical cauldron, called the Cauldron of Darch the Giant. That is another thing Avalon is known for, magical items. Even in the old tales, Excalibur was forged on Avalon. The 9 enchantresses make these items. I assume it's one of their main pastimes there in the peaceful grandeur of their enchanted isle. This particular cauldron possessed a magical power to identify brave men, as it only cooked for them, and wouldn't boil meat for any man who was a coward. According to the old Welsh tales, there were actually 12 more major magical items from the priceless treasure troves of Avalon. Together, they were called the 13 treasures of the Isle of Britain. The first is the sword of Rider Chael that bursts into flame when drawn by a worthy person. Most men turn down the chance to try it out, apparently. Could be awkward. The second is the hamper of Gwydion Garanir, a magical hamper which would multiply food. If one was to put food for one man in the basket and open it again, the food was found to be increased 100-fold. Third, the horn of Bran Gald. Basically a horn of any drink. It would magically grant whatever beverage the drinker wished for. All you had to do was wish for it, and the horn would provide. I wonder if only Dark Age beverages count. I could use a pumpkin spice latte right now. Fourth, the chariot of Morgan Winfor. A chariot described as a magical vehicle which would quickly reach whatever destination one might wish to go to. It belonged to a lucky 8th century Welsh king. Fifth, the halter of Clydnaiden. A magical halter that could tame any horse. A fortunate 8th century Scottish king got a hold of this one apparently. It was fixed to a staple at the foot of his bed. Whatever horse he might wish for, he would find in the halter. The halter of Clydnaiden was also called the handy halter, for it summoned some mighty fine horses. Sixth, the knife of Lothroded the horseman, a knife that could serve any food requested. This famous hero, apparently, was known for his beautiful beard, but also his hand knife that apparently cut slices endlessly off the roast beef, making him quite popular at parties, I imagine. Seventh, the whetstone of Tudwal Tudled, a magical sharpening stone that sharpens the blade of a fine warrior. It shall draw blood from any enemy of its user if its user be brave. If its user shall be cowardly, then the blade shall not be sharpened and draw no blood whatsoever. Eighth, the coat of patterned Bicerud, a coat that fit any man perfectly. Well, unless he was a coward. Yes, it only fit brave people. Again, it might get awkward if you borrow this guy's coat. Ninth, the crock and dish of Rygin of the cleric, the perfect companion piece for the horn of any drink. In this crock and dish, whatever food might be wished for in them, it would be found on these things. Again, I wonder if modern nachos would count. 10th, the chessboard of Gwenda Epicidio, a chessboard where the pieces would play themselves. This was a rather large, maybe people-sized chessboard with pieces of silver and crystal and the board made of gold. The pieces only play by themselves if all the pieces are set up correctly. 11th, the mantle of Arthur in Cornwall, a mantle or cloak that rendered the wearer invisible. As the name implied, it was owned by King Arthur and one of his most valued possessions. 12th, the stone and ring of Elune the Fortunate, now a fairly standard magical item in fantasy literature. This was a good old-fashioned invisibility ring. Merlin himself owned it. Okay, given being invisible must have been pretty popular on Avalon. I assume they needed two of those, both a ring and a mantle. These are the little-known secrets of Avalon, unknown even to most enthusiasts of Arthurian legend, who don't realize it was originally Welsh. Continuing with our tour of the real unknown Avalon, however, there was also the Castle of Avalon. According to the ancient tale, Arthur brought 3 shiploads of warriors to storm Annwn, and only 7 of them returned. It was a dangerous raid, so this intelligence about the nature of the Castle of Avalon was paid for with the lives of many of Arthur's men. Taken primarily from the ancient Welsh poem, Spoils of Annwn, the castle looks like this. It's often called Sar City, but also known as the Glass Castle, the Four-Cornered Castle, and the Castle at the End. This fortress is notable for its 4 towering peaks, known as the Turning Castle, but it doesn't necessarily mean it turns physically. In the sense of this word, in the ancient Welsh, it could mean that it shifts, so to speak, and is always fluxing like an illusion. It seems to defy the laws of space and time. The 4 peaks. This number, 4, is significant in old Celtic folklore and symbolizes the magical completeness of the place. It seems to be a place of magical creation and artistry. It would be a suitable place to practice and study magical arts, given its magical potency and completeness. Maybe that is why it contained the mystical cauldron of Annwn, which is what Arthur came to Avalon to get. The cauldron itself is described as having a dark ridge crusted with pearls. The castle was also said to be defended by deadly magical flashing swords and burning lamps before its doors. In places, it has walls of glass, which thousands of men could stand on, and magical sentinels who seem to guard the 4 corners. Magic water, together with luminous streams of light, courses like blood through the castle, always nourishing the inhabitants. Could it be the source of their eternal health, youth, and magical power for their enchantment. The 7 survivors spoke of the prisoners they encountered here, unable to escape from this magical stronghold of illusion. One could assume it was called the Castle at the End due to its being isolated beyond a magical wall of impenetrable mist, at the edge of the world of men, and on the frontiers of the other world, this fey world of the fairies, monsters, and enchantresses. The only major difference between Avalon, as it was seen in the later Arthurian tales of England and France and the old authentic accounts of Avalon, is that Morgan Le Fay was not its ruler. Though populated by many powerful enchantresses, like Morgan Le Fay, the real Avalon is ruled over by a king named Iran, a ruler of supernatural strength and wisdom. Though a force to be reckoned with when angered, he was seen as a just and fair ruler and loved by his people and by his queen. With magical powers beyond all imagining, he was also a passionate hunter. It was said he led his hunts through the heavens, where the cry of his hounds could be heard across the skies, in the seas around misty Avalon, every autumn around Halloween, which was the old festival time where the spiritual veil that hides places like Avalon was said to grow thinner. In fact, I can't think of a better way to spend next Halloween than somewhere at sea, near Avalon, listening to King Iran's hounds howling across the sky, just as the glass castle comes into view. Naturally, of course, with my pumpkin spice latte in hand, courtesy of my horn of any drink. That just about wraps up tonight's tale from Lorehound. Follow us as we sniff out more of history's most interesting stories.
As the hound dog entered the dimly lit library, he sensed an aura of mystery surrounding the ancient scrolls. The dusty shelves towered above him as he sniffed his way through the labyrinth of books. Suddenly, he picked up a scent and followed it to a secluded corner. With bated breath, he approached the shelf and pawed at the book, revealing the hidden scroll. As he rolled it out, he knew he had discovered a treasure worth protecting at all costs.